All right, welcome to another episode of Otherworldly Encounters with Mike and Brian. How you doing, bud?
Otherworldly encounters.
Yeah, all right. So, yes.
Not unworldly encounters.
Yeah, all right. So, maybe whatever we were drinking that last episode or the episode before, I may have jacked up our name.
Yeah.
But we're new, right? And
You know what? Listen, we're two dudes drinking beer in a garage talking about UFOs. If you expect perfection, you're in the wrong place.
That's exactly right. So, now that we got that, we talked about the elephant in the room.
Yeah.
What's your weapon of choice today, bud?
So I think this is from my buddy Ben. I found this in the back of my fridge. We kind of went with weird beers tonight. Usually we're kind of standard affair. Tonight I'm drinking Grand Traverse Brewing Company Glen Lake IPA.
Yeah, and I would like to admit that this was in my fridge, but I've done drink all the weird shit. So you brought me Kentucky Tangerine Cream Ale, and you're probably not going to hear like the can opening from me because it's an actual bottle, and
Class it up a little bit.
I have to use the old bottle opener.
Class
So here
it
we go. Yeah, see, but it did have a little it's good pop to it. Yeah. Ooh, that is interesting.
That's actually pretty good too. All right.
I don't know if this would be this is definitely not an all day drinker. But,
No, neither is this one.
but this is decent. This is definitely creamy.
I always hear the term session IPA, and I feel like we're in a podcast session. So, one for one, maybe that works out.
Yeah. I mean, this beer is not bad. It just wouldn't be one that I'd be like, hey, go buy me a 6-pack. This is give me one of your garbage beers and let's have at it.
Yeah.
All right. So what are we talking about today? Are we wrapped?
This
This is series 3,
one.
right?
This is 3 of 3. This is where we bring all of them together. So we talked about Fravor first. We talked about Graves second. And today we're talking about David Grusch.
Yeah, I'm actually really looking forward to this one. This guy's got a very unique background.
Yeah, all these guys, like a lot of military background, things coming to a head. We were always talking about how do you corroborate things, and we've got the account of Fravor, we've got the account of Graves, and then Grusch's job, literally, and we'll talk about it, was to figure out what's where and who has what. So he was kind of part of bringing all these guys together, and then it ended up being a congressional testimony with all three of them, and we'll get to talking about that.
Yeah, and it's really neat. So like the last 2 episodes, they've been pilots,
Yep.
right? That they've encountered UAPs, UFOs,
Right.
And this guy is an intelligence officer that worked on some type of.
Oh, he worked on a lot of different things. This
Yeah.
was actually more research than I've had to do for any of the other episodes because this dude's been all over the place.
All right, well, let's get into it.
But before we get into it, can we give the listeners a little sneak peek into what we're having happen next week? Because I think it's pretty exciting.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, absolutely, man. All right, so I was able to get someone who is a former reconnaissance plane pilot that's able to come in and give us and our listeners, I guess, better insight into the capabilities of what our military has, but not going so far down the rabbit hole to where we give any type of our adversaries any, I don't know, inclination or idea of what our true capabilities are. But I'm really hoping he can break it down Barney style. That's what we used to say in the Marine Corps, right? Make it easy for us to understand.
Yeah.
If he has to, draw us pictures in crayons with Crayola, I'm good with it.
You and I were talking a lot because Fravor and Graves, both of the things were radar contacts with both, but more specifically with Graves, because in Graves' story from 2014, they'd upgraded to the APG-79 radar system, and that's where they started seeing all this stuff. So you got a hold of your buddy. He's got some familiarity with this stuff. So I think it'll be pretty cool to talk to somebody who's lived this life firsthand to say, you've seen the videos, you've seen the images of the radar. We obviously never see that situational awareness screen that they're talking about. Let's talk about what they saw, what's recorded, and how that all works.
Yeah, I mean, he's going to be asked some pretty tough questions, and obviously some of the questions he may or may not be able to answer. So just to our listeners out there, don't be mad if we ask a question, he's like, I just can't answer it. I mean, it comes down to national security. We don't want to give up any type of intelligence that would affect us as a military, right? Like that's not our goal here, but what our goal is, help us understand what's going on. Tell us what you can, that's not classified, and we'll go from there.
Yeah. We're two dudes drinking beer in a garage and we want answers, damn it.
Yeah. Forgive them to us. But before we get into that, it was Father's Day, so we probably should give a shout out to all the dads out there.
Dads.
Yeah, shout out to all the dads out there. Keep working.
Yeah.
Keep doing your thing. And happy Father's Day.
Yeah. And just one last piece too before we get into it. You and I played golf earlier today. We shut it down after 15 holes because it's just hot as hell here.
That and it was just a complete shit show.
Yeah, we're not good golfers. We're real good at drinking beer and driving in a golf cart. Turns out golf is a secondary.
And we're pretty decent at doing podcasts.
Yeah. I feel like we're all right.
Yeah. So, we got that going for us.
So there's that. All right.
Neither one of us is going to be on the PGA anytime soon, or even the Corn Ferry tournament. We're not in there.
Well, unless Garage Beer or somebody else wants to sponsor us and we can do a podcast from a PGA session. I'm in for that.
I'm definitely in for that.
Yeah. I'll drink beers and talk UFOs all day.
Fingers crossed.
Yep. Okay. So with that, let's get into today's kind of topic, David Grusch. So again, this is 3 of 3. So we talked Fravor, we've talked Graves, and now we're going to talk Grusch. And the reason we did it in that manner is it was chronological, but then it all resulted in the culmination of a congressional hearing. So like we've done with the other folks, I want to give a little background on who David Grusch is. So Grusch has a bachelor's in physics from the University of Pittsburgh, which he got an Air Force scholarship for. And then he has a master's in intelligence studies from the American Military University. He is an Afghanistan combat veteran. And he was an intelligence officer for 14 years, both in the Air Force at the rank of major, and also from 2021 to 2023 at the National Geophysical Intelligence Agency, the NGA, and the National Reconnaissance Office, the NRO. He was the NRO, which again is National Reconnaissance Office, representative to the UAP, the Unidentified and Aerial Phenomena Task Force. And that group eventually became ARROW, which is the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office. So there's a whole bunch of information. This is what I'm telling you. Like the amount of research that had to go into this was a lot. This took several beers and a lot of hours of sitting and reading.
Yeah, and his military background obviously is impressive. But if I remember correctly, 7 of it was active duty, 7 of it was reserves, and then that's when or maybe during his reserve time is when he got brought into one of those government, whichever one that was, right? Because there's you named off 7 of them.
I know, that's so difficult. So let's just walk through these again for our listeners because there's a lot. National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, National Reconnaissance Office, the Unidentified Aerial Phenomena Task Force, the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, which is ARROW. And then if we take a step back a couple episodes, we were talking about Jay Stratton and Lou Elizondo, which are part of the Anomalous Threat Identification Program, which was ATIP.
With all that, whatever you're getting ready to say is legit, so we can just close down the podcast right now.
Right. Everything's sealed deal. Clearly. And I think for the listeners, and I think this is what makes this topic so fascinating and so worthwhile talking about. We're talking about however many offices we just named off are all talking about the same thing. But we've talked about it with Bob Lazar, with the compartmentalization of all of these groups, and you can only work on your certain segment. And even with David Grusch that we're talking about today, ARROW, all of these different groups are part of different agencies kind of working towards the same goal, but then also kind of fighting against one another. So similar to what Bob said in the first episode, if you want to, actually, this reminds me of a work saying I use sometimes. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And right now we're very siloed and everybody's doing their own thing. And I think Grusch coming forward is part of that. We need to come together to have a larger conversation about this because, yes, there's national defense implications, as you talked about with your friend, and not discussing too many things on the radar. But at the same time, if we want to advance the conversation, we've got to have a conversation that involves all of these different facets that are researching similar phenomena.
So I just had an idea. So after this episode and our next episode, let's let our listeners weigh in on this, because I think this would be a great idea for our listeners to weigh in. Is with these last 2 episodes, plus this would be the third and complete the series, and then the next one with our reconnaissance pilot that we're going to have on. Do we revisit Bob Lazar and take the information that we learned from the last 2 podcasts plus this one plus the next one, revisit it and find out, like, is Bob Lazar's story more plausible now than what it was, 4 weeks ago?
Try to corroborate some of those things.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that'd be pretty cool.
Yeah. So to our listeners out there, send us a message when you look at the bio of the episode that you're listening to right now. There's a thing that says write us a message or send us a message. Click on that and send us a message. Let us know how you feel about that.
Yeah. I'd be curious to hear from everybody. Let's hear what you guys think.
Yeah, let's do it. All right.
Back to the backstory. So the last piece that I have on David Grusch is that David helped draft the National Defense Authorization Act of 2023. And the reason that is important is because it included provisions for reporting UFOs, whistleblower protections, and then exemptions to non-disclosure agreements. So the reason that we're doing this episode last, and based on what I just said, and if you remember back to the last episode with Ryan Graves, part of what Ryan Graves talked about is there is a staunch underreporting of UFO, UAP sightings because of the stigma associated with it, and because there is no reporting mechanism in place to report that. So part of what this National Defense Authorization Act was intended to do is put in provisions to help report UFOs. So right now, I don't know that we're getting real numbers reported in. I think we're probably getting some kind of like false flags of information coming in.
Yeah, I mean, you make a good point there, because, again, even if the government or whatever, the military, provided an outlet for someone to self-report, there's always going to be, I don't want to say always, there's going to be potentially the stigma that's still there, because once you report it, it's in writing, people are still going to look at you funny.
Yep.
So I don't even if they implement that and they put it in place, I still don't see a lot of people coming forward, just because there's going to be blowback. Mm-hmm. Regardless of the safeguards that are around it.
Right. So let's walk through the timeline of events leading up to this, because I think it's important to talk through. It feels like there's a lot more media attention on the subject matter than there was in the past, and I think the cases that we've talked about and the one that we're going to talk about today kind of lead to this. So 2004, we talked about it. That was the David Fravor Tic Tac incident. And if you remember, there was a 5-year gap in time before anyone went to talk to David Fravor or any of those pilots. And that was in 2009 with Jay Stratton, who again was part of ATIP, which is the Anomalous Threat Identification Program. Now, if you remember, and I'll get into this momentarily, but Elizondo quits ATIP in December of 2017. So that's important to keep in mind here momentarily. So 2004 is Fravor. 2009, Jay Stratton investigates Fravor. 2014 is the Ryan Graves incident. And then 2017, Elizondo quits ATIP, gets together with the To the Stars Academy, and they release those 3 videos, and that's when the New York Times article comes out. So this is 2017.
Well, who released the videos? The Pentagon released those videos, right?
So To the Stars released the videos. The Pentagon didn't officially release the videos until 2020.
Oh, okay.
So
shocker that there is the government delay.
2017, the New York Times article comes out. 2019, David Grusch begins his investigation, right? So if you look at it from the governmental perspective, there's more and more traction. Hey, we better do something. So that's where we insert David Grusch into this story.
So it was almost like the government was hoping that this was just like one of those, it's hot right now, but it'll fizzle out. So we're just gonna, if we don't talk about it, it means it didn't actually happen. So,
right. So here's what's interesting. So 2019, the UAP task force director tasked Grusch to identify all special access programs and controlled access programs. And through the course of Grusch's research, he was informed of a multi-decade UAP crash retrieval and reverse engineering program. But the end result of that is that he was denied access to several of those programs. During that 4-year period that Grusch was researching this, he interviewed 40 witnesses over those 4 years. And I think what's interesting with this, so again, timeline's important here. So this is 2019. And also to take a step back, Grusch has said this in his interviews. When you hear this guy talk, he's very matter of fact about things. And he has admitted himself that he's high functioning autistic, which I think if you're talking about this type of research, and we talked about at the beginning of this, with the number of agencies involved, like my brain's already kind of like zoned out. It's like, my God, how many government groups can you talk about? Like, just get to the final result, man. So I think a high functioning autistic person makes perfect sense to go through all of this documentation to figure out what's real and what's not.
Oh yeah, because he's going to go line for line, and he's going to try to verify absolutely every piece of evidence or claims that there is. Now, you did make a point like about the recovery part of it. If I remember correctly, in one of his interviews, he said that this is either like there was a recovery in Italy, like either pre or post World War II, right?
We'll talk about that.
Which is some crazy shit if you think about it.
Yeah, we'll talk about that. So I want to get to what kind of where the needle came to a head for Grusch. So Grusch left in April of 2023. And the reason that he said that he left is these denials to programs. And he went through a Whistleblower Protection Act, which whistleblower protection, for our listeners is basically if the company you're working for does something that you disagree with and you know to not be correct, you can blow the whistle on that company and not have reprisal come your way.
But that's only for federal employees.
Well, it is for federal employees.
I just want to make that so all of our listeners out there, if you're working at Starbucks or something, you can't do a whistleblower. This is for federal.
That's not true. You could do it for OSHA if they're violating safety laws.
Well, that's okay. That's right.
Also federal.
Yeah.
So why that's interesting, that April 2023 date. Grusch's interviews that I've heard is he left because the doors are shut on him. Now, also happening at the same time, the director of AARO, which is the anomalous, where is that in my notes? The anomalous aerial.
It's one of the 15 different things you've already read off.
I probably should have just listed those out someplace. All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office. Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick on April 19th of 2023 had a briefing with Congress where he said that to the extent of his knowledge, the All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office had not identified anything extraterrestrial in origin. That is the same month that Grusch left. And one of Grusch's interviews is talking about calling Sean Kirkpatrick to let him know about his findings. And according to Grusch, he never reached back out to him.
Because of the name that you just read off is why the government uses acronyms.
Yeah.
Like, say that 5 times fast.
AARO. So we've got NGA, NRO, AARO, ATIP,
NGA,
UAP Task Force, UAPTF. Like, it's a lot.
Yeah, let's just stay with it. Let's just stick with the acronyms.
Yeah.
Acronyms.
Yeah. So Grusch whistleblows, and he's like, "This is bullshit. My job was to research the special access programs and controlled access programs. I have reason to believe that there's more information available. I have the top level clearance that I can get for researching this, and I'm having doors shut on me. I got to raise the flag and say I'm not able to do my job because other doors are shut on me when I should have access to said programs."
Which does make sense, because if you think about some of the past things we've discussed, is once you start getting too close to
where there's
something,
smoke, there's fire, right?
Doors start shutting, or your life really starts to change.
Yeah. So So, kind of the overarching theme of Grusch's findings is that we have intact craft and materials from the craft, and we also have bodies. He's reviewed photos and reports verifying that the claims, but all said reports are classified. And the one statement he made is that the materials that were identified are not of this earth. So I want to take some time to talk about two of the interesting cases that he brought up in his testimony, and then we'll talk about the testimony. And for our listeners, the testimony took place in, well, actually I have the date, July 26th of 2023. That's when we had the congressional hearing. And that was David Grusch, Ryan Graves, and David Fravor, the two guys that we've already talked about, plus Grusch. So let's talk about some of the claims that he brought up, because I knew about one and I didn't know about the other. And the first one is really interesting. When Grusch originally came out, he had done an interview with News Nation, and they held the interview to be released for a while. And one of the things that Grusch had said during the course of the interview was like, how far back does this program go? And he's like, at least a century. Like, well, what's one of the first cases you can talk about? And he talked about the first recovery was in 1933 in Magenta, Italy, where Pope Pius XII had notified the United States about the craft, and then we collected it in 1945.
So during World War II, we collected.
He had claimed that that particular craft had crashed, where his description was it was the quintessential saucer-shaped UFO that had kind of lost the sides. But he'd also said, Grusch had said, that some craft had landed. This wasn't all just crashes, some had landed.
Well, did he contact because back then that would have been like the Nazi party, right? Didn't he contact the Nazi party and then we recovered it? Post.
Yeah.
Or during World War II or post World War II or something, right?
Correct.
Okay.
So that was one case that was interesting. I think the other one that's interesting, I've read some things about this, but I think it's interesting that Grusch brought it up. Malmstrom Air Force Base, 1965. UAPs had hovered over a nuke base and shut it down.
Yeah, so I think this will be a whole different podcast, because I was actually doing a lot of research on UAPs, UFOs hovering over nuclear facilities. So, but it is interesting that they are.
Yeah, there's more than one incident of that.
Oh, absolutely. If you go back and do some research, you'll find several where these UAPs, UFOs have been around some type of nuclear facility.
Yeah.
Or military bases.
And I think it gives credence to like what we talked about earlier with the radar stuff. Like, maybe somebody knows what this is, who they are, where they're from, and what they want. But otherwise, it's just a group of people that we aren't really aware of. We don't control shutting down nuclear weapons. Like, you cannot have that happen.
Well, I mean, I think we've already established that whatever these things are, their technologies are superior to ours. So whether they're flying over nuclear facilities or warships, our military bases, there's really not a damn thing we can do about it.
Well, and I think, and you can't help but wonder, is that why nobody wants to talk about this? Because we can't do a damn thing about it.
I think you're onto something right there. Because
I think so. But then Grusch also alludes in his interviews that some of these craft have been shot down, and he kind of alludes to it in like specific means. So I don't know if that means we know what these are and we know how to get them down, or what. What it tells me is there is a lot more information that's not being discussed that this guy and other folks know about, that if you're using defense budget money to study and research this, if there's defense implications, that's cool. But it's like nuclear physics and like getting an education on that. You can go and take a nuclear physics class right now in college, but they're not going to teach you how to make a nuclear bomb. So the same kind of thing with like UAP research. Like, why couldn't you research the phenomena, if we have these craft, how they work, as long as you're not going out, as long as we're not teaching them how to do whatever it is that may be destructive with it.
Well, maybe that's the thing. They can't. You know,
right.
Right.
I think that's why I don't want to talk about it.
Maybe it's just because if you start teaching a class on UAPs, UFOs, and especially when it comes to the the actual vehicles themselves. What they would teach you that would be, they just couldn't do it, right? Because the information that you're receiving, that you would then go try to create or make said vehicle and potentially hurt a lot of people. I don't know. I don't know. Maybe there's just something underlining there. That's why they can't do it.
Well, and Grusch made, and he has said himself in the News Nation interview, and I think he might have done it on Rogan too. I don't remember, but they asked the question, have any of these beings harmed humans? And the answer was yes, some indirectly and some directly. And no more context as to what that means, but I think that's pretty interesting too.
Well, I mean, how many stories have you heard of somebody getting probed by an alien? I mean, could that have been the direct harm from an alien?
Well, and I think some of it is like, and I know this was on Rogan when he had Grusch on. He was talking about an Air Force guy driving to work, and a triangular UAP hovered over him like 200 feet on his way to work. And when he was driving a white car, and when he got to work, his white paint was milky white. And there's photos showing the paint. Like the paint was exposed to ultra high UV radiation in a short duration to basically fade the paint in a matter of an hour. So
that's interesting.
Yeah. And actually going back, if we go way back to episode 1, talking about Bob Lazar, when Bob went to S4 to work originally, he had replaced someone that he thought been killed because they tried to drill into this reactor. You're trying to do science on something that doesn't exist, and it exploded, killed him. Who knows? We don't know.
How would you like to be that guy? Right?
The first guy in?
Yeah, it's just like, well, they come in and be like, hey, I need you to do this job. You're hired. I'm going to pay you X amount of dollars, right? And you're just like, cool, I'm your dude. And then you show up, and they're like, I need you to reverse engineer.
Well, hold on. You're missing a big segment. First, before you show up, here's like 1,000 pages of paperwork and every non-disclosure agreement known to man. No one will ever know what you do. You can't publish, but you'll get paid well.
Right. And when you die, it's going to be a training accident. But like you go in there, right? And they're just like, right. I need you to reverse engineer this. We don't really know what it is.
Right.
The last dude, Bob, he's no longer with us.
Training accident.
There was a training accident. So we need you to pick up where he left off. And his drill is still currently in the side of this vehicle. I probably wouldn't touch it. You might want to think of another means of gathering that information.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sign me the fuck up.
And to that point, and I know we talked about it in episode 1, but Bob always made the analogy, and I thought it was a good one, like dropping off a small nuclear reactor in Victorian times. It would have lit up the entire town. No one would have known how it works. They would eventually have taken it apart, but once they pulled the shielding off of the reactor, everyone would have died. But science wasn't advanced enough to know that radiation was an issue, so everyone would have just continually died until science advanced to know that that was an issue. So to your point, being the first one in that scenario, that's a tough sell.
It's definitely a tough sell. I don't know if there would be any amount of money that would be like, I'm in on this.
It is an interesting question, but at the same time, and just like Bob said, it was like working with magic. Like there was no real explanation for how most of the things on that craft worked. Like that would be pretty cool.
Oh no, it'd be amazing to get in there. But here's the thing, right? If you're a scientist or a physicist or whatever, and you're getting this opportunity to go in and reverse engineer, and you're doing some really cool shit, but you can't tell anyone.
Brutal.
I mean, that to me would be painful. Like that would kill me on the inside, not being able to tell somebody, one, what I do, but two, just like the really cool shit that you're doing.
Yeah.
Like I don't know if I could do that.
I don't either. And that gets into the whole, how are they bringing people into these programs to do the research? Like you have to have some incredibly scholastically qualified people to work on this stuff.
A newspaper post, like remember back when the newspapers, they had like the job wanted ads.
Yeah. I wonder what that would have said.
That's what I'm really like imagining right now is someone just like combing through. Cause I mean, we've all been there where we just need a job, right? Like we're on hard times, something didn't work out. We need a job. And so we're combing through the wanted and something just piques our interest. And we're like, you know what? I'm going to call this. And as soon as you call, they're like, you're hired, be here, whatever. And you get there and it's not exactly what you thought it was going to be from the newspaper ad.
Right.
I'm pretty sure that's what they do.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then they offer free beer.
Well, sign me up. One of the things I wanted to circle back to that we didn't talk about, and I thought this was interesting when we're talking about we don't want to give information to adversaries that may be able to use that, regarding the situational awareness radar and some different things. Grusch brought this up. I don't know anything about it. I didn't look it up, but I think it's interesting. There is a 1974 treaty between the USSR and the U.S. that was basically discussing nuclear holdbacks, and one of the sections of the treaty discusses UAP monitoring near nuclear weapon sites.
Really?
Now, isn't that interesting?
1974?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
We're going to have to look that up.
And Grusch gave the specific section and page number that this was located on, so we can find it. I didn't write that portion down of what he was talking about.
Oh,
but
thank God, because this podcast will be like 3 hours long.
oh my God, yeah, dude, there's so much information.
Like we might have to do a recap to the recap on this one.
Right? So Grusch talks about the Magenta, Italy case in 1933. He talks about Malmstrom Air Force Base in 1965 with UAP over nuke sites. And I believe that was in Montana. Malmstrom's in Montana. But then he also talked about, and this kind of leads into the congressional hearing, he evaluated Graves and Fravors cases. So I think that's interesting. You and I have already talked about those. And the other one that he did not evaluate that I don't know if there's enough information for us to do a whole podcast on, but Jeremy Corbell had originally put the video out, and it was the 2019 USS Omaha splashdown video where you see an orb. It's night vision. The orb is in the sky, and then it splashes down into the water. You can hear the folks talking about in the background. They send out some submersibles, and nothing's in the water.
And that would be interesting. We'll have to definitely take a look into that. But let's talk about his congressional testimony, because you mentioned obviously Graves and Fravor, and they were to his right and left during his congressional testimony, which is, I think, and very important to know, because now you've got the two guys we've recently spoke about or discussed in our podcast, and they're right there alongside of them. And this is the funny thing about this, and it's just maybe me being, maybe I'm turning into a conspiracy theorist, but you have the commander, right? And then you have Graves. Mm-hmm. They received no blowback whatsoever on their accounts, right? They didn't even investigate their claims until several months later. But now you've got Grusch, who became a whistleblower, went through all the proper channels of reporting his experiences. Mm-hmm. He's in front of doing congressional testimony with the other two guys, and he's the only one out of the three that had any type of repercussion.
Well, and I don't know if he had repercussion. When you talk to Grusch, he says that he did face reprisal because of what he did personally and professionally. He quit his job to do this whistleblowing.
Yeah, but they came after him. He was, if I remember from the Rogan, he said that someone anonymously sent him photos and saying, "Hey, your family's, you and your family are not safe or whatnot," right? So come on, he's obviously getting close to something.
He said that they made it known that they could get to him anytime that they wanted to.
Absolutely. So now this is going to turn into a Bob Lazar. He's going to get some information that his wife is cheating on him and shit.
So let's set the stage for the congressional hearing a little bit deeper even. So you've got Graves, Grusch, and Fravor all at the table to give their hearings to Congress, or give their testimonies to Congress, rather. Behind them are basically the two linchpins that have just pulled every lever known to man, and that's Jeremy Corbell and George Knapp. Corbell and Knapp are behind these guys, and then directly behind Grusch is the attorney representing him.
All right, so you have two other people behind them.
Just seated in the audience, but they're the lever pullers of all of this. They're the ones that put these guys front and center. Not so much Grusch. Grusch was on his own accord, but Fravor and Graves certainly were pushed forward from Knapp and Corbell. So kudos to those guys for bringing the issue forward. So let's congressional hearings. So we've covered the cases. Our listeners know about it. We know about Fravor's case, what happened. Fravor told his story. We know the Graves case. Graves told his story, and then Grusch told his story of research and investigation and where doors were closed. So and we can talk more about that. But I think the two biggest things that came out of this hearing. First, it was the first time that members of Congress who wouldn't sit on the House Intelligence Committee would have heard about these things. And I think what's interesting, and the devil's in the details with this stuff. One of the people who is the House Intelligence Committee chair, a Republican from Ohio, Mike Turner, is blocking the UFO legislation. And wouldn't you just know it? One of his, who would you guess is one of his primary financial backers?
I have no idea.
Lockheed Martin.
Oh, there you go.
Oh, what a shocker that is. And then, so I think that's the first big piece.
Not that we're getting political.
Yeah. And I think that the second...
We are a neutral podcast.
I think that the second piece that's interesting...
We're just bringing out evidence.
It provided political capital to push for transparency on what is or isn't happening with defense budgets, right? So you've got the case of Fravor, who said... I don't know what the hell this thing is. Why are you operating my airspace? Same thing with Graves, but Graves' approach was, I don't give a shit if it's us or ET from, planet Xenon. Like, we have to know what's operating where so we don't get pilots killed because we're operating at high speeds.
And see, that's the part that really kills me, regardless of what side of the aisle you're on. You would think that you would want some congressional oversight of these, black op programs that are going on. Like me personally, I can give three shits
right
what they are at this time, but I do agree that there needs to be some type of congressional oversight of what they are doing and where they're spending our tax dollars. Mm-hmm. So regardless, like how much information they're going to release to us, I'm okay kind of being in the dark on some of this stuff, but I do believe that they need to sit in a skiff with our congressional leaders,
right,
and they need to know what the fuck is going on, what our tax dollars are going to, what the reverse engineering, what is potentially flying around, what type of peace treaties we may have signed in the past with whoever. That's what I care most about, is just that it's just not a program that is just operating on its own accord, spending our money to wherever they see fit. There's got to be checks and balances is what I'm getting right. What I'm saying.
I totally agree. And I think the hard part, and here's like one of the few times I would side with the government, right? Playing devil's advocate here, is these committee members are, and even the president too, maybe you're in office for 4 years. You're in and then you're out. So is it really a situation where I can give you a century's worth of information that is top secret and classified, knowing that in 4 years you're out the door and I don't have oversight of you or what you do anymore? Like, it's a hard thing to wrap your mind around, because keep in mind too, and Grusch said, we're in competition with our adversaries. And he didn't say it directly, but he was referring to Russia and China. They're doing the same thing to understand what these non-human intelligences are. And I think it's short-sighted for us to assume that this is only happening in the U.S. This is happening all over the globe. So it's not just us studying, retrieving, trying to reverse engineer. There's other nations trying to do the same thing.
Well, what if there's just a nonpartisan executive director of whatever who just reports to whoever is in charge of the intelligence committee at that time, right? Like, you still have somebody that's reporting something. What they do with that information is on them, but at least you have something established where it's acknowledged that there is a government entity that is investigating UAPs, UFOs, and maybe they'll never do like a televised congressional hearing, but it is something that they are reporting back to said, because you're all right. You make a good point. Like, these congressmen and senators, they're in and out, right? They may not be there more than 2 or 4 years. So I understand there's going to be a lot of turnover there, but that still does not. It still is. That's not a scapegoat to me to where you can just go all willy nilly and do whatever the hell you want.
I think the hard part, and I don't disagree with you, but I think what you just described is the life we've been living. Like if we start talking about all these agencies that this dude is involved with, so you've got, again, just top to bottom, National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, National Reconnaissance Office, the UAP Task Force, the All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, the Anomalous Threat Identification Program. It's like you're all doing similar functions, maybe not all geared towards UFO, but UFO is certainly a part of the discussion. But because you're so compartmentalized, like no one in Congress knows shit, which is why Grusch pulled the pin on his career and said, let me run this up the ladder at my own personal stake because somebody should know, by the way, here are these 2 pilots that you trust with your super expensive jets and to protect your people that are saying they've seen shit too. And this feeds into what he's researched and seen.
And I'm pretty sure after the government listens to this, we're going to be invited to work for one of those 7.
Yeah, we'll probably be like audited every year.
Well, I'm just saying they're going to be like, these guys know what they're talking about. We need to have them on board in one of these acronyms that you just read off.
Yeah, well... if you see a GoFundMe from Otherworldly Encounters, you guys will know what it's from.
Thanks for getting our name right, Brian. That's a shout out to Otherworldly Encounters, which is actually our podcast name.
Not to be confused with Unworldly Encounters.
Which, yeah. All right. Okay. Since you brought it back up, the garage beer was flowing that day. Mm-hmm. All right. And it was just a little minor slip up on my part. Yeah. I've already owned it.
Yeah.
It is funny though.
So I that kind of concludes, I think, a lot of what I wanted to talk about with Grusch. And I think what's interesting about these 3 folks is this kind of brings us to the spear point of you've got the 2 folks with the experiences, and then you've got the guy who went through all the proper channels with the proper clearances, through the proper protocols to investigate. And again, jumping back to the beginning when we were talking about it, his job reporting to the UAP Task Force Director was to identify all special access programs and controlled access programs. Because again, that chronological timeline, 2017, hey, American public, here is all these videos of shit that the military's recorded that's really weird. And then 2 years later, we get Grusch tasked with investigating what these, maybe call it like black book programs are or are not. So
what could be the broader implications if Grusch's claims are proven true?
Oh, God. One of the things that Grusch talked about, and this term is used a lot when talking about this subject now, is non-human intelligence. And Grusch himself, and I don't know if it's because he has a bachelor's in physics or it's because of things he reviewed, but he's talked a lot about non-human intelligences and talking about whether that's from somewhere other than Earth or from Earth, but not necessarily that these things are acting on their own accord, but they're almost like a hive mentality, that these things are operating on the behalf of some intelligence beyond their own.
I find the term non-human intelligence funny because I found some humans that lack a lot of intelligence. And we've already, I think, proven that these non-human intelligent folks are way more intelligent than us human. You see what I'm saying? I find it very ironic that we're calling it non-human intelligence when they're obviously so far more advanced than, potentially more advanced than what we are.
Yeah.
Think about that for a minute.
Yeah.
Yeah, it makes you, see, it just kind of like, it's like such a weird term. It's like we're trying to belittle, UAP, UFOs, extraterrestrial life as being very minimal. They lack the intelligence of us humans, when in all reality, they're probably superior.
Well, I think so. I would take a different viewpoint on that because I think when you typically have talked about aliens in the past, you would say extraterrestrials, meaning they're not of this earth, not of this earth. But if you talk about non-human intelligence, what that leaves the door open for is that maybe they're not from out in outer space. Maybe they're from here.
Oh, so we're going back to Travis Walton.
No, I don't think it's Travis Walton, but I think if we go back to talk about Fravor and keep in mind, and this will be a good subject for next week when we talk to our pilot friend to understand more about radars. Fravor said the Tic Tac was the main point of the video, but if you remember when Fravor rolled up on the Tic Tac, there was a 737 sized cross under the water that then whatever happened to it. So that thing's down in the ocean doing whatever it is. So do we have some kind of like deep sea or deep earth group of beings that are, I don't know, more advanced? Maybe it's Atlantis that sunk.
Oh, boy, that would be a great topic. Wouldn't that be some shit? If they were, so I mean, if you think about, okay, so if you think about, if you go all the way back to, like the Mayans, the Egyptians, you know, you look at the hieroglyphics and all that stuff, like a lot of them post some type of like alien being on a lot of their drawings, right? So you can ask yourself, was Atlantis part of some type of extraterrestrial beginning where they, the aliens themselves, taught or showed Atlantis all of their technology, so they're just super advanced. And then as we progress as a civilization, we become dum-dums.
I think it's...
I mean, because you think like building the pyramids, all that stuff, you know, that they talk about, in the way that all those pyramids align, you know, to certain things, and the way that they align with stars and yada, yada, yada. And they never had, obviously back then, never had any type of communication with each other. I think we're the dum-dums, man.
That may be the case. One of the things that I think's interesting when you're talking about if it's a terrestrial theory, if these things are from, or maybe they were an early human population that went subterranean for whatever reason, which I don't know. Maybe that's not too crazy. We had the KT asteroid wipe out dinosaurs and cover the Earth in ash for years and wiped out everything. So maybe it would make sense to go underground.
Supposedly,
there is this.
It could have been aliens.
There is
some type of, they got pissed off and nuked us.
There is the Derinkuyu underground city, which is in Turkey and is a big enough underground structure, series of structures to house 20,000 people. And it was discovered in 1963 when a guy knocked down a wall in his basement. But it's like, why in the world would you choose to live underground? Like, what's going on about it could be a great defense strategy, or is this the beginning or end of some other series of episodes where somebody decided that being subterranean was more ideal than surface?
Well, I mean, they cut down on energy costs.
Yeah.
It's nice and
true.
Cool.
Basement's always cool.
Absolutely. So kind of getting back into the Grusch stuff here.
Yeah.
Like, what are the main arguments from skeptics regarding this? Like, what do you think that like the skeptics out there? And let me just like talk about this for a second, because I know in like the very first podcast when we were talking about Bob Lazar, I kind of labeled myself as a skeptic, and I have taken a step back, and I'm sure all the listeners have kind of taken this or got this by now, as I start calling myself a tweener. And the reason, and I'm just going to be very transparent on why I kind of took a step back from the skeptic thing. Skeptics to me are people who, regardless of how much evidence you put in front of them, they'll never be happy, right? They're always trying to poke holes into something, because, you know, you could sit there and say the sky is blue, and you show them the sky is blue, and they're like, no, it's more aqua. Mm-hmm. Right. And I don't want to be that guy. I want to be the guy that's, you know, I'm very inquisitive. Like, you show me the stuff like that you have and let me analyze it myself. And then I'll come up with an educated guess. So that's why I call myself a tweener. Right. So, but to the skeptics out there, not myself, I'm a tweener. How do you think they're going to poke holes in this?
In Grusch specifically?
Let's just talk about Grusch, and let's just kind of wrap them all in together, man. Let's just look at Graves, Grusch.
Yeah, and Fravor.
Fravor.
I think for Grusch, he is such a hard person to argue against, because even in his congressional hearing, the root cause problem with the subject matter that we're talking about is the reason that he helped author the National Defense Authorization Act of 2023, which was pushing for transparency because so much of this shit's classified. So we're taking at face value that what Grusch tells us is accurate, with the caveat that so much of what he knows, the addresses and names that he implied in his congressional testimony that he could give Congress of where these craft are, who's involved, the timelines, are classified. So unless you have that level of classification, the subject matter can't be discussed. If you're following the letter of the law, which I applaud Grusch for doing. I think it's the right thing. You got to work within the context of the law. So good for him. I mean, that's a good patriot move to follow.
Oh, absolutely.
But at the 100%. Same time, from a skeptic standpoint, how can you, it's so easy to poke holes in something. You literally, it's not really that different than Travis Walton, because really David Grusch is just telling a story. There's no documentation to support what he's discussing outside of the 1933 Magenta, Italy, and the 1965 Maelstrom Air Force Base case, which again are just stories. Now, 1933 apparently recovered this craft. Grusch says he knows where these devices are held, but it's classified and can't talk about it. So is he full of shit or not? I think the thing you could say that gives Grusch credence is that he spent 14 years in intelligence and was the lead, was appointed by the UAP task force director to identify these programs. So if you're the person to be put at point from that role, how do you not believe that person?
Yeah, I guess what I would say to all of our skeptic friends and listeners out there is this: you may not always have direct evidence to something, but if you follow the breadcrumbs, eventually you can start piecing everything together, right? So if when we looked at Bob Lazar, we had a small piece of the pie. I'm not even going to add Travis Walton into that, right? Yeah. Let's skip over that bullshit. Yeah. But then we go into Graves, Fravor, and now Grusch, right? So if we had started with Grusch, maybe the skeptics were like, okay, well, there's still a lot of pieces, but all of a sudden now you're throwing in 2 other episodes, and it's like, okay, maybe it makes sense. But we threw Grusch in last for a specific reason, right? Is because what he's saying tends credence to everything else we talked about, minus Walton. Again, bullshit. But if you look at Lazar, you look at the other 2 episodes, and then what he's saying, it all makes sense. So it may not, to my skeptic friends, it may not be everything written in black and white right in front of you, but follow the breadcrumbs, piece stuff together, and then come up with some type of conclusion. Yes, you can sit there and still poke holes in it all you want. But again, just be open-minded, be a free thinker, right? And just, and
I think
talk about it.
That's and I know we've been trying to keep these podcasts like 45, 50 minutes. I'm looking at the clock right now. We're at 53, but
let's get after it.
Because this is a conclusion one, and you brought up a really good point. I think we should take some time to pin particular points of what we just talked about together. And so we talked Fravor, Grusch, and Graves, but let's go back to Bob. Let's talk about key pieces of information pulled from Bob.
Yeah.
Element 115, we can't corroborate shit other than that it didn't exist when Bob said it. Now it does. Bob said that when these craft operated at high speeds, they went, end over end and kind of pointed unaerodynamically in the direction they wanted to go. We take that situation and then we introduce Fravor, who's talking about the tic-tac and the way that this thing accelerates and moves. Then we talk about Graves, and we've got Graves' craft doesn't match what Bob's said, but Graves' other counterpart that was flying on the East Coast captured that gimbal video, and the gimbal video operated exactly like Bob said it would, where it went kind of up on end and then accelerated and the thing's gone. Then we go to Grusch, who's saying, hey, I've got these guys with me. I've reviewed their information. I think it's legit. I'm going to take Grusch at face value and say, well, if you're put in this position with the education you have and the background and intelligence, I'm going to give you some credence. He thinks Graves and Fravor are legit. And oh, by the way, here's 100+ years of history of other shit going on that somebody in Congress who authorizes monies being spent to black programs should probably know what's going on, because there are implications that are really, potentially earth shattering. And you and I have talked about it a lot, like the 3 fundamental questions that everyone's interested in. Where are we from? What happens when we die? And are we alone? And this conversation feeds right into those 3 questions. So 1, how are you not interested? But then 2, like, you've got a lot of potential, to your point, you got a lot of potential breadcrumbs sitting in front of you that if you get through the bullshit of the bazillion acronym, you name it, agencies, put it all under one roof, put one point person in charge and say, let's go figure it out. But you have these people breaking out. You have the Lou Elizondos that are like, fuck this, I'm out. You have the David Grusches who say, fuck this, I'm out, because they're getting either stonewalled or they're finding things that are so damning that they're like, this needs to go to a higher level platform.
Yeah, and then it goes back to reputation and livelihood. They've got families they're trying to support, right. And a lot of this stuff that they have in even current or former pilots have that they can come forward with would just be life-changing, but in a negative way.
Right, like a smear campaign.
Absolutely. I mean, look at Bob Lazar, next thing he knows, his wife's cheating on him and he's getting arrested for sniffing cocaine off some stripper's ass, right?
Right.
I mean,
and audited every year.
Yeah, for his online trinket store. So, I mean,
yeah.
It's just a lot to unpack. And I look at these guys who have come forward and I have the utmost respect for them, because when I think about that, they're not going to. I don't believe any one person at their level is going to come forth with bullshit information. Like, to me,
could you be imprisoned? Like, if Grusch, actually, this is a good question. If Grusch, because he was doing congressional testimony under oath, if anything that he said was bullshit, would he be subject to like prison?
I mean, you're lying under oath, so I'd assume so. I don't know. I mean,
That's
it'd be a great question to research.
Really thought about it.
But that's why I'm saying, like, you're going in front of Congress. The 3 of them went in front of Congress. You're testifying in front of the American people because obviously it was live on TV.
Yeah.
Why would you do that for some bullshit reason?
You quit your job. You put yourself and your family at risk because you're doing what you thought the right thing to do was within the means that the law gave you to operate within, which again is cycling back exactly what Graves said. There's no method to report this shit, and Grusch said there's stuff going on that no one's allowed to know about. And
to talk about Grusch when it comes to like information that he can reveal and can't reveal to the American public, there are just things that out there that are so sensitive that we just don't know, and I respect that. And the reason we can't know that is because our adversaries we don't want our adversaries to know that as well. So, but if you watch his testimony, he will say, I have no problem having this discussion in a SCIF.
And what does SCIF stand for?
I should probably know sensitive that. Compartmental information something, if I remember correctly.
Okay.
But basically it's a room that is uber protected from any type of like outside interference. You can't take your cell phones, you can't take a computer other than a government computer. Like, it's just locked down, right? Yeah. It's just a very secured facility. But I mean, his willingness to go out and actually and say, "Hey, I'm willing to talk to you within length, right, of everything I know, but this just is not the setting for it." And I think that's where like the American people might get frustrated. It's like, well, just fucking tell us. Well, there's
far-reaching implications.
Absolutely, there's things that could be said that we don't want on CNN or Fox News.
Right.
And to all of our listeners out there, just please understand that there's like national security, regardless of what we're talking about here, is always going to be at Brian and I's utmost.
Yeah.
Like we don't want to talk anything that's going to.
We want to know, but we want the disclosure to be done responsibly.
Absolutely. Right.
Yeah.
So, don't get frustrated when you hear, well, I can't talk to you in this setting. Just be like, okay, well, it must be so sensitive that there's a reason he or she cannot talk about it in that setting.
Right.
Now, what our elected officials do with it after he or she goes into a SCIF and talks to them about said incident. That's why we elect people.
Well, it's interesting too. So some of the skiffs happened, and Tim Burchett, who is a representative from, I think, Tennessee, even talked to it. They were frustrated because even the information provided in the skiff was such that it didn't give answers. It only really led to more questions.
Sensitive compartmented information facility. So
You're close enough.
It was close enough for our listeners. But yeah, it's just like a super secure, everyone has their tinfoil hats on.
So what do you think, Mike? What do you think needs to happen next? So now that Grusch, Fravor, and Graves information's out there, it's been presented in front of Congress. I think there's actually been some actions, and I think the portions of the National Defense Authorization Act that Grusch helped write have actually been negated, which is unfortunate. But I mean, what do you think needs to happen? What's the next step in disclosure in your mind, assuming you believe this stuff?
Well, again, I think it just comes down to common sense. There's things that I agree that the American people need to understand and know. There are things that I agree with the government that shit just needs to be amongst people in the know.
Yep.
What I want them to be transparent about is to our men and women who are operating in our skies and in our seas and on the ground, that if there are UAPs, UFOs, that they are made aware of said.
Yeah, we have air traffic controllers for a reason.
And we also have civilian flights, international, whether it's
right,
nationally here in the United States or international, that are flying through these skies. I think that information of where these UAP, UFOs are currently congregating, or flying around, I think that needs to be made available to pilots, whether they're civilian or military, because at the end of the day, we just want people to be safe, right? And if this podcast brings anything out, we just want, we want just the safety first. You're a safety guy anyway, right? Yep. Safety first. I don't care what those things are doing, as long as they're not obviously evil and attacking us. But if they're just out there kind of flying around and doing their thing and dipping their toe in the ocean or whatever, cool. But just don't hit any of our shit.
What do it's interesting when you talk about these beings or whatever they are they aggressive? Are they defensive? Are they conservative? We've had so many terrible things happen on this planet, and there's been zero intervention from these things. We've had the Holocaust, World War I, World War II, 9/11, all of these events that they could have been prevented or had something to do with. So it leads me to believe that they're probably neutral. But what do you think? And you and I have talked about it. Are we the farm lab or the zoo?
I knew exactly where you're going with this.
What do you think what is this?
All right. So to Brian's point here, there's three theories, right? Whether we are a farm,
yep,
an experiment,
yep,
or
a zoo.
I think we're an experiment, personally. Because, again, what I mentioned earlier, if you go back to the Maya days, right, where they had all this amazing technology, and they have depictions of aliens and everything else. I think that they were mainly the start. I know this sounds really weird coming from a tweener, but I think we're the dumb ones, man. I think we're experiment. I think that the technology was so advanced back then, and us being very with our egos are no, we're more superior intellectually. And so what they did couldn't work because there's no way they had the technology back in the day. So I think we're experiment, man. I think we're getting dumber.
So to the technology point, and so the pyramids in Giza.
Well, we can go to fucking the Roman roads. Some of them roads still exist, and our roads are.
I was just going to say,
paved
Giza,
10 days ago, and they already got potholes.
In the King's Chamber, those are 40-ton stones, 300 feet in the air.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because they had helicopters and stuff back then. All them laborers, you threw it on their shoulder and come on, boys, we got beer to drink. Let's get her done.
Yeah.
No, it just makes you think, man. I truly think that, we're experimenting. I think that, whoever's out there is looking down, just laughing. There's no need to fuck with us. You know why? Because we're going to do it ourselves.
Well, hold on. We just talked about it today. You said there's no need to fuck with us. Yet in 1965, one of these things hovered at one case of one of these things, because I think there's multiple if we get into it, shut down a nuke base. Why would you shut down a nuke base? Probably because we know how absolutely devastational these, Hiroshima. We know how devastational these things are. So are these things terrestrial and subterranean, and they don't want us shooting nukes because we screw up their whatever that is?
So I thought you were going to ask about the one that was found in northern Italy, and I was just like, that would be like you and I, right? Like, grab a 12-pack of beer, come with me, let's go look at these idiots. We're flying around, we get fucking toasted, and we wreck our vehicle.
We're the ones that die of the radiation. We're the ones that Bob talked about in Victorian times. They're like, what the fuck is this thing? Let's take it apart and see.
Yeah, obviously they didn't
We're the people that die.
They didn't find the beer bottles that was attached into, or whatever extraterrestrials drink.
Yeah. Yeah.
But no, I mean, what do you think? Do you think we're a zoo? Do you think we're an experiment? Do you think we're a farm? Where are you at on this?
Man, I wish I had the answer. I think I'm still an unknown. I don't know that there's enough information for me to point to one thing or the other. The Fravor incident makes me think that we are a farm, not in the sense that they're farming humanity, but they're farming Earth's resources for whatever that purpose is. Like, I don't understand why you have craft going from sea level to space, up and down with something under the water, unless you're taking some kind of resource from whatever it is in the ocean and then zipping it up or reloading, or I don't know what you're doing, but I don't think that whatever they're doing has anything to do with humanity. But I think that maybe they have an interest in making sure that humanity doesn't screw up their resource. And that's where the nuclear piece comes in. And I think that's where we start to interact.
So you're saying, then you're saying that there's a chance that it does not have to be one specific. It could be actually a combination or a trio. It could be all three.
I think we're probably I guess if you put it in that context, I think we're probably a farm in the sense that they're mining this planet for whatever resource that we're unaware of. And that we're also a zoo whereby they're monitoring what we're doing so we don't fuck up the resources.
That's fair.
Yeah.
I can get behind that.
Yeah.
I mean, if you start putting all of it together, I mean, that makes actually a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Because I mean, we fuck a lot of shit up as.
Well, we played 15 holes of golf today. We didn't do anything to write home about. So.
Well, we did stop.
Well, we stopped.
We knew better.
We were responsible.
We decided maybe we should go grab some beers instead.
Yeah, and do a podcast.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, Brian. So what do you think? We wrapping this one up?
Yeah, I think it's time to talk about what we think Mr. Grusch's cocktail choice is. Mike, I'm going to have you go first.
I think it's just going to be straight vodka.
Straight vodka? Why? What makes you think that?
I just got this feeling, man. He's just like, you know what? I think I'm either... Okay, I'll give him tequila. Just straight tequila.
So a liquor guy.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, he's one of those guys that... Like, he comes off to being, obviously, he's a very intelligent dude. I'm not going to give him that. I'm not going to take that away from him. But, like, he doesn't seem like a partier if you would meet him. But I think behind closed doors, he's like, tequila makes my clothes come off. I think he was right. I think he's right there, man.
Oh, that's pretty good. Well, I wish I had a cool story to go with that. That's pretty good. I think Grusch is super generic. He just comes off as so vanilla to me, which is exactly what I expect from somebody from an intelligence standpoint. I just feel like he's a Bud Light, like two beers a week kind of guy.
Just 2 beers?
Yeah. I just don't see it out of him. He just seems like a boring human being.
So he's obviously in not any type of like beer league.
No, I don't think he'd have a great time if he hung out with us.
I think he would have a great time if he hung out.
I would have a great time. I'd ask so many invasive questions, he'd feel uncomfortable.
That's probably why he would not have a good time.
Yeah.
But if we didn't do business, they were just like, hey, man, let's go play 9 holes.
Could you do that? Could you play 9 holes with David Grusch and not ask him a UFO question?
Oh, absolutely.
Could you really?
Oh, absolutely.
I couldn't. I don't think I'd get through 1 hole.
Dude, I used to golf with my boss and never ask anything about work. Wow. Because your golf course is just a place like to get away. Like you forget all that bullshit. Now, once we get to that back, after we're done playing golf, we get back to the bar, game on. But when we're on the course, man, we're just out there to have fun.
Right.
You know, talk shit, drink some beers.
Yeah.
Go and take walks through woods because that's typically where our balls are at. And then...
Right. If you need to find water, let me hit a golf ball. I'll probably find it.
Every once in a while, we get to go, you know, walk around a pond.
That's what I'm saying, man. If I could hit a golf ball on Mars, I guarantee you I could find water on that planet.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm right there with you. Maybe they're going to be sent up there.
Right.
Like, hey, we need you to find water. Like, cool. I'm taking my driver.
Come on, Elon. Get those rockets rolling.
I'm taking my driver and any other club I have, and I will find you water.
Yep.
All right, Brian. So that's the end of this podcast, man.
Yeah. Appreciate you guys listening. And as always, keep your mind open and your eyes on the sky. You never know what's going to fly by.
And with that, we'll catch you on the next one.